Dice are rolling, darkness falls. Inside the GM Studios halls. Tabletop games where nightmares creep. In a realm where sanity is lost and weak. Welcome to the abyss, where dreams shatter. Inside the GM studio, nothing else matters. Blood and chaos, the dark arts unfold. In the realm of role-playing, where legends are told.
Greetings and salutations out there in electric internet land. Welcome to the side question episode of Inside the GM Studio, where we field questions from the internet on the roll of a die. I am your host, David.
I'm Matt.
I'll get right into it. For the uninitiated, I roll a d20 here. Matt, sight unseen, gives me a question from the internet, and we fire from the hip. Let's hope it's something mechanics related for the last episode of Mechanics Month. I get a 4.
All right. 4. All right, this one comes from Swift Coyote on our Ask Game Masters with the title, When Players Take Notes, what important story element would you recommend as the best track for better storytelling? Note-taking is hard, sometimes necessary to keep focus. Notes are vital to weaving backstories together and moving at a productive pace. Notes aren't exciting, and there are so many things we could try to capture. The question that comes to mind is, what is most important? How can GMs maintain more immersion from the characters by helping the party to be more strategic with notes? Any particular favorites you found? Am I missing any? Number 1, open quest. 2, intriguing possibilities. 3, NPCs. 4, character details. 5, accomplishments. 6, world events. 7, key locations. 8, relationships. 9, skills and education. And 10, cliffhangers.
We've gone back and forth about note-taking. I think we did an episode about it a while back at this juncture. But it's understandable because cataloging what happens, especially if you don't play super frequently, is important, so you don't lose track of where you are in the story. But as we discussed on that previous episode, if my recollection serves, the more players are steeped in taking every note down, the less attentive they are to what is actually happening. So it provides a great record of what happened, but takes them out of what is happening. The list that the questioner gave is pretty comprehensive, but probably thinking about it a little bit too much in terms of, strangely, the mechanics of what constitutes the story. So it's important to note that the problem really arises because you're telling a story, and the story includes more than just the plot of what is happening, right? The plot is just the sequence of events in an adventure, where the story includes all of the history between the characters, their backstory, the location, and any history that location has, as well as the stakes and themes and all of this other more complicated stuff. Trying to catalog all of that in a way that is meaningful to the players down the road can be a little arduous. Generally speaking, I advise parties to have someone who is the note taker.
I agree with that.
And yeah, and so the note taker should be focused mostly on the plot for the sake of the other party members. So the note taker decides what relevant plot points. Doesn't need to take notes on everything individually, but just kind of creates a captain's log, a record of like what has transpired and where the plot is going. And once they do that for a while, they'll get good at like knowing what to include. And if they don't have to include everything in the entirety of the story, it makes it much easier for them just to kind of jot down. And then we went here, and then we talked to this guy, and this is yada yada yada. Then each player can be kind of alleviated of the responsibility of the nuts and bolts things that are relevant to the plot. And they can focus more on things that are personal, things that kind of establish the mood, the themes, the motifs, things that are relevant to their backstory, and jot them down. You, as a GM, need to be ensuring that you're not giving the players too much information as to confuse their note taking. This is a very delicate balance. It's something that has taken me 30 years, and I don't know that I'm even still good at it. But we all want to create vivid worlds, so we give world building, and we want to create vivid characters, so we give character details, and we give character histories, and we give all of these things. But what you don't realize is that some of those things, in the interest of creating a vivid story, can be distracting. They can be red herrings to the players to not know, should I be noting that this particular noble has a certain type of jewelry on or something like that? Or is that just flavor? Is it relevant? But our own instincts are likely pretty well calibrated to this. So if you're being a thoughtful GM about only including relevant details and not ones that are, let's say, ancillary or auxiliary, then your players will latch onto things when you make note of them. Smart GMs kind of leverage this sometimes when you come into a room and it's empty or something, and you describe all these things that are like peculiar or whatever to kind of throw the players off, and they go like, "Oh, the GM was talking about this thing a lot. It must be important." And they're like investigating every aspect of some fucking table, and you're just like, "It's just a table." But failing that sort of like red herring on purpose, you need to make sure that you're not doing it on accident. So remind the player
Nope. Okay, there you are.
hello, hello.
Yep.
Sorry. And take two. Remind the players that the best things to pay attention to are often things that pique their curiosity. So when they get new information, either about a character or something in the plot, that's probably relevant to take note of. Also, any lingering questions that they have about anything, mysteries, things that are left unanswered, that kind of falls into the umbrella of cliffhangers, because a good cliffhanger should leave the party wanting to know what happens next. It might be in the plot, it might be something for character relations, it might be something for backstory or whatever. So those are the biggest marquee things that you want. Like, what information have the players got that move the story forward, move their character arcs forward, and what are they still wanting? And then what are the things that might manifest as clues to answers to those particular questions, or codify the answers to particular questions? You could go about it by like, these are our open quests, but I would think that if you're just doing that, the first thing that I mentioned, that it would probably be pretty evident what the quests are, and also the quests would be handled in the overall plot, right? Who are the marquee players? This will be made better by limiting your detail on the cast of characters. If you describe somebody in great depth, what they're wearing, what their demeanor is, you're speaking in character, they have a role-playing scene, then the players likely know that the character in question is important to the narrative. But if you're speaking in character and providing every detail for every bar wench, swordsmith, or whatever, they're not going to really know. They're not going to really know who's relevant, and that admittedly will kind of take some of the mystery out of things. But mystery and a mystery isn't like laid itself to good note taking, because really what you're doing is you're putting in subtle clues and things that like the PCs don't know what's relevant, and they don't know what to pay attention to. And so that's part of the mystery. So if you're crafting a mystery of some sort, there really is no way around that conundrum, because if you only draw attention to and give detail on things that are relevant, the mystery will be too easy. Um, so you need a lot of red herrings and things that, seem like they're relevant but aren't necessarily mixed in with the things that are relevant, or your PCs will be able to figure out the mystery really quickly, because you're like, oh, well, like he's only talking about these three characters, so one of them must be the culprit. And this character has this detail that I noticed, and that's certainly relevant if he mentioned it. So, ipso facto, it's this guy that did it, or this is where the thing is located, or
Mm.
this is why they did that. And so you need competing information for mystery, so it makes it a little more difficult. But I would suspect that most D&D adventures are not mysteries insofar as that the PCs have the relevant information available to them that is pertinent down the road, but kind of escalates as they learn more information. So if you structure it like a hierarchy, the more the PCs navigate the adventure based on the information you do give them, and what is relevant segues to the next thing that's relevant, then the adventure unfolds. I mean, every plot is essentially a mystery insofar as that you shouldn't know how it's going to resolve at the beginning. But that's not the same thing as like an investigative style mystery. So, any of the pillar points that I missed there, Matt, that I didn't address?
I don't think so. I was thinking about it myself here and how uh, I take notes as a player, much like I do as a GM. I was looking at his list here, and out of the 10 that he has, I do intriguing possibilities. I always take notes of which. So when I take notes as or note taking at my table, I usually have the players take the majority of the notes, and always have them, because I like to do recaps, and I will usually have one of the players do a recap for us
Hmm.
if we do have a note taker. We don't always have a note taker. Sometimes people, they just don't give a shit. That's fine. They want to be more in the game and in the story than they do want to be taking notes. Totally fine. But if we do have a note taker, then I'll ask them, hey, bring us up to speed, because that also brings me up to speed, because I don't keep a lot of notes of where we were when we left off. I kind of leave that up for the players. Um, but intriguing possibilities, I know I've talked about on the show many a times when a player says something when they're talking amongst themselves, and they say, "Oh, well, I think this could be going on, or this could be happening, or it could be this creature, or it could be this person." And even though I didn't plan for that, it's like, "Ooh, that's a good idea. Yes, yes, it could be this person." I will make a note that said, maybe change this down the line or use this as a storyline, in a future adventure. Um, NPCs, of course, especially if you make NPCs on the fly, make sure to take notes of all your NPCs. Uh, if you know that they're going to be reoccurring, let them, and as soon as they are going to become reoccurring, even if they are player created, pretty much, uh, like if they really want to get to know, like Dave was saying, like a bar wench, or even the blacksmith, and they really want to get to know them, start fleshing them out a little bit, make notes of them. Character details, I don't think that's a real big one for GMs. Accomplishments could be. It depends on how big the accomplishment is, and if you want to use that accomplishment as maybe a hook later on, or if you want to use that against them in some way. Not to be, antagonizing, GM player versus and all that. No, no, no. You can use their accomplishments to uh, spice up the story much later. World events, I have never really kept notes on world events. Sometimes I'll have a calendar made, uh, just so I know that if something's coming up, or if there is a holiday that I want to make sure to make prevalent, I will have it written down. Key locations, I don't really worry about in notes. That's not true. Actually, that is not true at all. As a GM, sometimes I do make notes of key locations, only if I really have to like go back to it over and over and over again. Relationships, no, I don't deal with that. Other than again, that's just like NPCs from above. Relationships, I don't deal with. Skills and education, and I don't. Cliffhangers, no, I don't really make notes of cliffhangers. That is going to be the players' note taking and upkeep. I was for a while on my Wednesday group. I would write down where we left off because there was no real note taker in that group. They would always jot some stuff down here and there, but they weren't like the our recap note taker that I've had
Hmm.
in other groups beforehand. Me as a player taking notes, it's much as I do it the same way. I do a lot of bullet journaling style note taking, where it's more of yes NPCs, locations that we've been to, factions and groups that we encounter, or find out that our party members are a part of. Uh, Things that I feel are going to be very important in the quest, in the adventure, in the campaign itself. Uh, I've gotten to know Dave's systems, or and his mannerisms pretty well, so I can tell when he's saying something that's going to be pretty important. And even in Google Docs, I just write my notes in Google Docs. I will even highlight areas that I think are much better. Uh, and I think that's it. As a GM, I don't take many notes. I'm very very sparse with notes because there's
Hmm.
so much other stuff that I'm keeping track of, and
Sure.
I don't feel like notes really play on the actual story itself. It doesn't give it any more structure or any more flavor. I've found that the story comes more from on the spot improv and through the players themselves. It's just between all of us together. That's where the story unfolds. It's never really anything that I've made a note on or even written for the adventure.
Yeah, well, I mean, I believe the questioner was asking from a GM's perspective, and maybe I misread the question. How can he, like, what tips can he give his players to take better notes on their end so that they follow along with the story and are engaging with it in a more meaningful way, I think is
Yeah.
what he was asking. You brought up a couple of key points that I wanted to elaborate a little bit on. Uh, Most of the things that he's teasing out here seem to be relevant to the plot. Um, and so things like accomplishments, cliffhangers, stuff like that, those are all going to be under the umbrella of the plot. So anybody that is kind of taking points on what is happening with the plot, that should all be covered. But again, don't confuse plot with world building.
Hmm.
World building is part of the story, but it's not the plot. And so there's kind of two strategies to go about doing this. One, only embed world building stuff as it's relevant to the plot. A location comes up, a character is here, a faction is operative. Try to bake that into the plot as much as possible so you don't need to give the players extraneous details about the entirety of the world that distract them from the plot arc. And then the world building will kind of percolate through naturally. However, that comes at a cost, which I was reminded of by what the point that you immediately segued into, which is like often what you're doing when you craft any sort of narrative is you're communicating to the players what is relevant. And hopefully that ought to be what interests them. However, if you give extraneous detail, something that might not be relevant, and your players notice and latch onto it, it's an indicator of that it's something that they're probably interested in.
Hmm.
And that provides a lot of opportunities, as you noted, as GM, to be like, okay, they apparently took a lot extensive notes about their interaction with this Smith. And so maybe that's an indicator that I could make there be a little bit more there, like give a plot point, shift a plot point from one NPC to this NPC, or help them foster a relationship that would bolster their goals. But that would be more in the kind of second camp, which is if you provide a lot of world building details, then what you do is you throw a bunch of stuff out and you make the world very vivid on a variety of different aspects. Then you see what your players latch onto and you flesh those things out a little more. That would work if you have a real sandbox kind of adventure style, or if your players are really curious and self-driven. Generally, I err on the side of us not assuming or trying to not assume that players are going to be that way because sometimes they're not, or some of them are and the other ones aren't, and they're kind of in conflict about like what area to pursue, or they feel just a little lost as to where the plot is going. So I tend to err on the side of just like doing the world building embedded in the plot. This happens and this happens in this location with this NPC, and you can give them a little bit of world building as it becomes relevant. And then, occasionally there are going to be a few things that they latch onto, but you could just do a shotgun approach, give them a ton of world building. It would be on the opposite end of the spectrum to just give them nothing but world building. Here's the world, and here are the things that are happening, and here are the conflicts, and here are the key players. See what they latch onto and what they pursue, and then flesh out, allow them to craft the plot and find their fun where they may. That's much more of a risky game because players are typically, they want a plot and they want like some sort of structure and to know where it's going. But if you do that too heavily, then it railroads them, as we've discussed before. You just say like, I'm only giving you relevant details for A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Like that's where the plot goes. They'll feel bored and they won't even really want to take notes if they realize that the plot only goes in one direction. So you have to give enough curiosity and stuff for them to kind of pursue things and pull at certain threads. And this is where just kind of knowing the sensibilities of your group play in. But if the pillar things, some of the things that he noted, a lot of them are plot, but some of them are world building. And if you don't want to necessarily include world building as a way to get your players curious about certain things, something is, there's this abandoned outpost that's said to be haunted outside the city. It's like, okay, why are you telling them that now? Are they supposed to go there? And in which case, what's the plot point that pulls them there? Are they just supposed to be curious about it? And if they're not supposed to be curious about it, why did you even include it? Sure, it gives the world texture, but you could just, as the PC's investigator learning things, mention it when it becomes relevant, even if it's not relevant right now. Like it's one of 4 quests they have open, and now they're just kind of balancing which quests they want to pursue, but now they know it's there. And they learn more about it when they kind of go down that path of that quest thread. It's a good strategy if you want to do world building when you want to open a lot of quests, like in some video game where you kind of just mill around the world. You have a main plot thread, and then you mill around the world, and then suddenly you have like 10 open quests. That's great. That's a great way to do it, but you need to kind of wrangle it in and not keep dumping more information on whatever. Try to think of it as like a one big ball of info as world building with little offshoots for each quest. And as they go down the path for every little offshoot, give them a little more that builds that quest and that like scope of the world out as they pursue it. Otherwise, they'll just feel overwhelmed with a whole bunch of things, and don't be. You'd be surprised at how perceptive players are. Like you throw a little detail in, and players are more like hyper aware. Just make sure you're when you give a player a bit of information, it's kind of a promise that it's there for a reason. Just like when you read a book, just like when you watch a movie, like you should think of like every scene should be doing something for the plot, revealing something about the characters, their motives, what the stakes are, where the plot is trending. And if it's not, then the scene doesn't belong in your movie. And we've all watched movies and read books that are just too long-winded and there's just too much to them, and you're just like, it's just overly ambitious, and it's like, why is this in here? So you need to make sure that you're careful about when you give a player a bit of information, that there is something there and that you follow through on that promise, and how much that promise is predicated on their desire to pull at the thread and how much of it is just kind of in the plot naturally will depend on whether you have a main plot and subplots, side quests, or whatever. It'll depend on how sandboxy it is, but just be prepared to deliver on any given bit of information that you give the player, even if it doesn't end up becoming relevant. It needs to potentially be relevant, that you're prepared to commit to a promise or to craft something around the player's interest in this bit of information. They hear a rumor, they spot something, and if they pursue it and you just have nothing be there, then it's like, why did you give them the information to begin with? And if there was nothing there to initially, then you could craft something as an indicator to like, oh, the players are interested in this. I should like make there be some there. I can probably just tinker a few small things. I mean, a lot of stuff could be interchangeable among NPCs and locations or whatever. If the PCs have kind of latched on to a certain character and they haven't been introduced to another character that's a quest giver or something like that, just get rid of the one that you haven't introduced and just make the quest giver the one that they have already latched onto. It's easy enough. And it's that way with locations and stuff like that. Most things are not really solidified, but if you're more of a kind of main structure, the main plot goes in one direction. It'll just depend on how many side plots, side quests, and everything you have. But if you get too much going on, like for a side quest, just remember that marquee NPCs, um, big events, things that are the most dramatic, they ought to stay within the confines of the main plot and don't go down a rabbit hole exploring subplots if your adventure, has like a determined conclusion. It'll just feel like a big waste of time.
The majority of the comments on this post, many of them reflect what the very first one, Red Riot Zero, says. Your players take notes, count your blessings. Many people reflect on that same one. Many of the other comments are them just talking about what their GM notebook looks like. But this one I found very satisfying because it made me think of both, David talked about it earlier, and what I've done before, where you take notes in character. Uh, Dode Fisks Jr. says, when I play D&D, I simply write down things that happen in the order that they happen, events that happen to the party. But when I play Call of Cthulhu, I maintain a list of people, places that are important, and add information to the various sections as we find it. Personally, I like to use tone to inform my decisions. I don't like having a way in which I do things like take notes. I like to use the tone and intent of the game to influence how I take notes. That is in some way the reason I take Call of Cthulhu notes like I imagine a private investigator would, with information structure, and D&D notes like I can imagine an epic bard would. Then they A, then they B, then they C. This approach is aimed more at immersion than strategy. And that's, yeah,
It's
I agree with that. I like that. I'm more immersion of the notes than just, if you are going to be like the note taker, if you have a little bit of, uh, put a little bit of artistic flair in there to make it a little bit more immersed, that I think that's really good.
Well, he teased out kind of what I was getting at is Call of Cthulhu is a much more like mystery investigative sandbox.
Hmm.
You just have like a problem you're trying to solve, and then how the players go about solving that problem. There's some key information and key locations, but it's not it's not omnidirectional or it's not unidirectional. It is omnidirectional. And so you could go over here to this library, you could go over to City Hall, you could go over to the newspaper archives, and there's information contained in each of those, but and you stitch together the narrative and the mystery. But D&D is much more structured in an epic fantasy kind of thing. So don't lose sight of that overall like main plot. And I mean, if you're just more of like doing a series of one shots or it's more pulpy, then maybe it doesn't need to have a through thread. But I would just manage how many side plots, how many quests. You should always be asking yourself if it's something in a character's backstory, if it's something in the relationship between them and an NPC, if it's something that has to do with world building, if it has something to do with some element of the story other than the plot. Is there a way that you can incorporate it into the main plot of the story. And if there is, do that. It's better. Full stop. Just
Yep.
every time it's going to be better. You can roll it in and then make it somehow relevant to the overarching plot or make it come out as part of the overall plot. Because otherwise it'll just feel like a series of bottle episodes that are just like, now we're focusing on this character and the relationship drama with this other NPC or this faction. And it's like, but I was just pushing the whole story forward. And given that all players are supposed to be unified in their goal if they're a party of some sort, the last thing a rogue wants to do is kind of tag along with a side quest for a fighter having to do with a fighters guild or something like
Mm-hmm.
that. Like they're just going to be like, what is it? How does this involve me? Why do I care? Is this germane to our goals? But if it's somehow embedded in the fighters guild is like warring with some other faction that you're trying to like topple, and then you might be able to leverage them. It's like, well, now you have a character thing, a side quest, and it's all relevant to the main plot. Those things all go in the same direction, and they keep everybody like invested. Because ideally, what you would want is if you're crafting the narrative thoughtfully and everything is tight and buttoned up, what you should find is that if you took all of your players' notes and looked at them, they would all say almost exactly the same thing
Mm-hmm.
because they all can pick up on what is relevant. And maybe they might have more detail about what's relevant to their character's backstory or their character's relationship, but it would still relate to the things that the other characters have in their notes. That's the ideal situation. So try to think of how you can give exposition and craft information that every player at the table knows that's a relevant thing. I should take a note on it. And then that way they kind of have a collective mind. And when you think about things in that way, it ensures that all your players aren't like siloed off, telling themselves different stories about what's happening in the adventure. They have a collective mind and it's much more organic. And so it's much easier to remember what has happened because everything is interlinked. If everything is interlinked to the central plot, then it makes it really easy to remember this happened, then that happened, then that happened. And oh, and when we found this thing, there was like this peculiar guy. And I was, yeah, what was that guy's deal? I had questions about it too. I put it down here in my notes. Yeah, me, I was wondering what happened and where that was going. And so then that helps the party kind of all be on the same page. So some of it just comes with how you disseminate information and what information is relevant, but mostly just try to link it to the main plot. And don't offer too many red herrings unless you're going down a side quest that is like really mystery oriented and it's supposed to be fully player engaged. But that can get tedious when it's not linked to the overall plot. If you're looking for an item and it's a little side quest that plays into the main plot, then maybe that little side quest is much more mystery oriented, but then it ties back in and you get back to a more classical structure. Little reprieves like that, just like a bottle episode in a TV show, is fun and welcomed because it adds color and texture. But you wouldn't want a whole series of just bottle episodes. It would be random and weird, right? You want the plot to kind of go in one direction. So
All right. Well, I think that's going to bring us to the end of this episode, unless you got anything to add at the very end here, David.
nah, I said enough.
All right. Nice. Then we'll just leave this one at a good night.
And good luck.